Welcome to the second installment of 5 Minute Fridays with me, the Ancient Egyptian. As there was no video last week, I've done a 10-minute plus to make up for it. Today I'm answering the question asked by Blair Vaughan53. He asks, what is one ancient Egyptian artifact that you wish people understood better? Very good question. Here's my answer. When most people think of Nefertiti, they think of this. Her famous painted bust has become one of the faces of ancient Egypt. Elegant, regal, timeless. She has since become an icon of modern social movements. But what if I were to tell you that her bust wasn't discovered in a spectacular tomb, or gathering dust in an ancient temple? In fact, it was discovered buried in the sand in the middle of the desert. The reason? No one wanted it. Behind that beautiful face lies a far darker story. Nefertiti wasn't simply a queen. She stood beside history's most radical pharaoh as Egypt abandoned thousands of years of religious tradition. Together, she helped oversee a revolution that shook the kingdom to its core, and her legacy became tied to the repression and collapse of an entire era. When Nefertiti married the future pharaoh Amenhotep IV, Egypt was at the height of its power. The temples of Amun were wealthy beyond imagination. Egypt controlled vast territories in Nubia and the Near East, and tribute flowed into the royal treasury. For generations, the country under the New Kingdom, since the first pharaoh of the 18th dynasty Ahmose, had remained remarkably stable. The pharaoh made the offerings to the gods, and in turn the gods delivered bountiful harvests year on year. Egyptian armies won victory after victory, bringing home everything of value from foreign conquest that wasn't nailed down. It was the greatest nation on earth. The reign of Amenhotep III is considered by many to be Egypt's golden age, and it was assumed that his eldest son, Prince Thutmose, would succeed him. He had been groomed since a young age to be pharaoh. He was crown prince, high priest of Ptah in Memphis, and held many other titles. But he died. So after much palace politics, the powerful Queen T placed her younger son, the future Amenhotep IV, as heir to the throne. This would be a fateful move. Around the 5th year of his reign, Amenhotep IV changed his name to Akhenaten and announced a new religious direction. The Aten, the visible disk of the sun, would become the centre of royal worship. Traditional gods were gradually sidelined. The great temples lost royal support. The powerful priesthood of Amun saw its influence slip away. This wasn't simply a change in religious belief, it was a complete restructuring of Egyptian society. Religion controlled land, taxation, employment, and political influence. By attacking the traditional temples, Akhenaten fundamentally altered the balance of power across Egypt. Now you can look at this in one of two ways. Akhenaten the politician wanted to increase his power and revenue as the temples were operating as a state within a state even during his father's reign. This will be a whole other video. And the other way is the enormity of the religious conversion that Akhenaten experienced meant he pushed ahead with this reform through pure religious zeal, without regard for the consequences. The answer is probably a strong mix of both. Standing beside him through every stage of this revolution was Nefertiti. Unlike previous queens, with the exception of Hatshepsut 100 years earlier, most notably at her beautiful Deir el-Bahri temple, Nefertiti appears throughout the monuments left behind, performing rituals usually reserved to kings. She offers sacrifices to the Aten. She wears crowns traditionally associated with royal authority. Some scholars even believe she acted as co-ruler. Whatever her exact political role, there is little doubt she became one of the principal public faces of Atenism. The royal family itself became central to the new religion. Ordinary Egyptians no longer approached the gods through familiar temples and local priests. Instead, the king and queen acted as intermediaries between humanity and the Aten. This was enormous power, which would be used to full effect as time went on. Sacred temple carvings were chiseled, statues were smashed, Lands and property seized, and severe punishments were meted out for those worshipping the old gods. To many Egyptians, centuries of tradition had effectively been replaced. The biggest change was to the event which Egyptians prepared for all their lives: death and the afterlife. If there were no gods, then what did the afterlife look like? The Book of the Dead still being inked were automatically redundant. How do you go from believing you will live forever if you are pious and well behaved in this life to what is decided by the whim of a new pharaoh? That alone made the new religion deeply controversial, and it must have introduced a tremendous sense of fear. The wrath of the gods wasn't an abstract idea in a book. The ancient Egyptians knew and saw it. Plagues and famines were commonplace. Akhenaten and Nefertiti, instead of leading an inclusive new faith, were in fact head of what we would call a cult today. The residents of the city Akhenaten had built in the desert, Armana, were given gold to appear loyal. Egyptians across the country would secretly pray to the old gods, but there was another problem. While Akhenaten focused on religious reform, Egypt's international position weakened. Letters from Egypt's allies, preserved in what we now call the Armana letters, repeatedly begged for military assistance against rival kingdoms and local rebellions. Next, all requests went unanswered. Historians continue to debate how much damage this caused, but it contributed to the impression that Egypt's rulers had become distracted by religious ideology while foreign influence declined. What is certain is an important source of revenue for the nation, tribute from foreign kings and princes, stopped. In turn, this made the country poorer, as all remaining resources were being funneled into the pharaoh city, Armana. Then came the greatest inevitability of all. After Akhenaten died, the entire system collapsed with astonishing speed. His young successor abandoned the name Tutankhaten and became someone we know very well, Tutankhamun. The temples reopened, the old gods returned. The royal court left Armana. Within a generation, officials were officially dismantling monuments built by Akhenaten and Nefertiti. The names were chiseled from stone, their statues were smashed, their city was abandoned to the desert. Later generations referred to Akhenaten as the enemy and the heretic. Nefertiti suffered the same fate. For over 3,000 years, much of her story was forgotten. Ironically, the woman now celebrated as Egypt's greatest beauty was once someone Egyptians wanted to erase from history. But perhaps the darkest part of Nefertiti's legacy isn't what happened during her lifetime. It's what historians still can't answer. Did she take a more leading role than Akhenaten in the advancement of Artenism? Did she become pharaoh herself? Or did she disappear before the revolution finally collapsed? The surviving evidence simply doesn't give us definitive answers. And as you will know on this channel, we only deal in facts. So until we have evidence to definitely answer some of these questions, they will remain prompts of speculation. That uncertainty has certainly allowed myths to flourish. Some portray her as a visionary, others see her as an accomplice in religious persecution. The truth at this moment lies in a pragmatic assessment of Nefertiti's impact. If we judge on the basis that she had capability and agency, then she was an accomplice to a proven repressive pharaoh who made Egypt poorer and sabotaged the nation not just economically, but geopolitically as well. She also in part risked the wrath of the gods who she knew the ancient Egyptians in their millions feared and worshipped. She became the public face of a religious revolution that dismantled centuries-old traditions, weakened some of Egypt's most powerful institutions, and left a legacy so controversial that later kings tried to erase it completely. But to add balance, she was one of history's first monotheists, perhaps the first woman to do so. She also was part of a counter-movement to the growing power of the Amun priesthood, which was a growing constitutional threat. A priesthood which would in fact seize power just under 300 years later, around 1080 BCE. A move which would fragment Egypt and leave her vulnerable to later invasions. So what are we to make of this remarkably preserved bust of a truly unique woman? My answer is not to forget the item's origins. Her contemporaries placed no value upon it, left behind and forgotten. It is only with a postmodern lens projected onto this item that her story is being retold. This does raise the insidious fallacy of presentism, but that is a story for another video. But the fact remains that what she would consider her greatest achievement vanished beneath the Egyptian sand almost as fast as it was built, her religion and her city. If she and Akhenaten had lived longer, Egypt may have collapsed. Perhaps this is Nefertiti's greatest irony. The woman who has one of the most recognisable and celebrated faces in human history led Egypt down a path of destruction and destitution for her subjects. Behind that famous face lies a cautionary tale about power, religion, and why you should never take an ancient artifact at face value. If you have a burning question about ancient Egypt, or would just like to see clarity on something that you already know, please write your question in the comments. Thank you for watching and taking the time to support the channel. Please hit like, subscribe, and ring that notification bell so you never miss a future episode.